Hello, thank you. I would like to begin with a preamble before I dive into my personal story. Child poverty is not a given or an inevitable fact. It is a crisis, a policy failure crisis that violates the fundamental rights of the child. The crisis of poverty can come for any of us at any time. For single mothers, in our current policy climate, simply becoming a single mother plunges our children into the crisis of poverty for 1 out of every 2 of us. Our share of BC's poorest children is extremely high. We are raising nearly 55,000 children below the poverty line. Thousands more hover just at or above that line. That so many impoverished children belong to women raising them alone is an inescapably feminist and women's rights issue regarding economic equality and access. Rigid gender roles in relation to parenting trap women in solo child-rearing. This does impact the child poverty rate in British Columbia. Also, single motherhood is truly a poverty equalizer among women. This province creates a perfect storm for single mother poverty, regardless of education level, socioeconomic status, and other factors. My experience of poverty and struggle as a single mother over the last 5 years has led me to a preoccupation with women's and children's anti-poverty advocacy in BC. An organization I co-founded, the Single Mothers Alliance of British Columbia, with a group of single mothers 5 months ago, is a member of the First Call Coalition. Thank you for the opportunity to share how my personal story illustrates the need to implement every recommendation in this report. I became a single mother when my son was 4 weeks old. In the fragile postpartum period, it was an instant poverty crisis. With no home of my own and a newborn colicky baby, I was thrust into poverty. I did have basic EI maternity leave at the time from my full-time job, though the amount I received was not enough for me to live independently and support myself as a lone parent with a child. I had no choice but to move in with family under duress. Struggling to get back on my feet, I grabbed a random survival job in desperation, a low-paying, precarious job that allowed the flexibility I needed to take care of my baby, though it did not promise hours. This part-time job without benefits did little to help me in my situation. The part-time precarious work that many single mothers must choose in order to balance the juggling act of parenting, unaffordable childcare, and work excludes them from labor protection and benefits. This is unjust. I had much trouble locating a childcare space, which is not surprising since we have licensed childcare spaces in British Columbia for just 20% of children. So I found a caregiver, a Russian immigrant, I will call her Ilana, herself struggling with poverty, to look after my son a few days a week. Her rate was $11 an hour. My hourly wage was $13 an hour. I took home $2 an hour. It was a mess. Looking closely at the 3 of us, we can see a kind of case study. We were 2 women and 1 little boy among thousands, trapped in a culture of poverty created by low-wage work and unregulated childcare in BC. I was trying to participate in the labor force, to work, but the reality of low wages made it futile. Working full-time with a poverty wage meant I would live $8,000 below the poverty line on that wage, and this would solve none of my problems. Ilana was one of thousands in an unprotected, low-wage labor force of caregivers in BC, made up largely of women. We have a culture in BC of poor women taking care of other poor women's children in licensed childcare settings. From each angle, the loss for Ilana, myself, and of course my son is clear. The childcare crisis in BC is a women's poverty crisis, a workforce access and participation crisis for mothers, and in the case of single mothers' struggles to work, it has a direct and profound impact on the child poverty rate in this province. I wanted to work. I tried to work. But the crushing cost of housing, lack of spaces in affordable housing, and the cost of childcare had clamped down over my life like an iron claw. And then, as the story goes, with so many single mothers, especially with children under 5, this trap drove me straight into a wall. One typically rainy Vancouver day, I pushed my baby buggy down to the welfare office. I had done everything I could to avoid that moment, but the deck was stacked against me. Social stigma and our charity-oriented response to child poverty and single motherhood posits that single mothers and their children's lives are defined by hand-me-downs, handouts, subsidies, and state dependency. That a single mother-led family is a woman and children in need of charity and government support. But this is not an inevitable reality for single mothers and their children. It is a choice our current government is making, and with the right policies and supports, it can be eliminated. My baby became a welfare baby. We know what research on the social determinants of health tells us regarding the lifelong impact of early poverty on infants. It is a kind of life sentence. We also know what the solutions are, proposed today by First Call. The public system of integrated early care and learning with a $10 a day childcare plan would have allowed me to work, provided my son with an enriched ECD environment, and Ilana the opportunity to thrive as a new immigrant and ECE professional in this province with a decent wage and benefits. It would have prevented my son from ending up on social assistance when he was most vulnerable as an infant and toddler. Stuck on welfare, with time passing as I struggled, I have felt my ability to work, my career prospects starting to trickle down the drain the longer I stayed out of the workforce. Here enters another grim reality regarding wage inequality, discrimination against mothers and motherhood in the workforce, and economic exclusion. The earnings gap in the workplace is greater for single mothers than it is for other mothers. We are at the bottom of the heap if we are working at all. This is a child poverty issue. Where women are losing in a game stacked against them in the workforce, single mothers are not even on the team. We are in the food bank lineup. Our children are the ones that pay the price. So there I was, dangling from the shreds of monthly welfare checks. A ministry staffer told me to get a job, any job, right away, or I would lose benefits. On social assistance, I was being pushed into getting any minimum wage job in the service sector as fast as possible. I could apply for other high-paid jobs in my field, but I could not hold out for them. Previous work I did not matter. If I could work at Tim Hortons tomorrow, I had to. I finally found a daycare spot for around $1,300 a month. Mothers with subsidy would still be left with a hefty bill of at least $700 a month in this case. But with rent, food, diapers, transportation costs, a minimum job would not even have come close to meeting my needs. And I would work 40 hours a week to remain in poverty and rarely see my beautiful baby. If I attained the job I was being forced to get, I could not leave the home of my relatives and pay full rent. I could not live independently. I could not afford a bus pass or diapers. Our welfare system was trying to force me as fast as possible back into the precise situation that had landed me on welfare in the first place. It was a chaotic nightmare that made no sense whatsoever. The welfare rates are so low. Without my family and friends, my son would have been much worse off, as we know thousands are today. Raising the welfare rates is crucial to reducing child poverty in BC. Being on welfare, for me, was like treading water. Our broken system requires you to use all the energy you have to stay in exactly the same place. And then you tire. You feel yourself starting to slip under the valued work that suits you, under the social fabric of communities, under society. You begin to lose hope, you start to give up, and you sink. And then I got a letter A letter that read, "Your rights to determine family maintenance have been suspended and assigned to the Family Maintenance Enforcement Program." I panicked. I was filled with fear for how it would impact my particular situation. It was like a punch in the chest. How those words ring in the ears of any Canadian: your rights have been suspended. The plan I had spent time creating with my son's father were void. The clawback wrecking ball was swinging its way into our lives. They would forcibly collect child support from my son's father, deny my son the funds, and subtract the amount dollar for dollar from my check, if they could collect it in the first place. My son was being punished for my poverty. Single mother plaintiffs and the Single Mothers Alliance of BC will meet the provincial government in court to examine the rights of children and single mothers in relation to this policy that deepens poverty every day for the poorest children in the province. Joining that lawsuit was one of the easiest decisions my organization has made. There are certain policies in Canada and BC that treat the children of single mothers and other single parents differently than other children. In the case of the clawback and income splitting, these children appear to matter less and have fewer rights. Income splitting denies the existence of single-parent families. It wipes us completely off the map, as if we don't exist. We are not even the losers at the table, thrown some scraps. We are not invited to the table at all. In history, children born out of wedlock were abandoned by the state. They were called filius nullius, Latin for nobody's children, the illegitimate ones. The clawback and income splitting are two wrongful policies that treat single mother and single parent families and their children differently than other children, and as far as our governments are concerned, wash their hands of their responsibility for them. With little ounce to hang on to, I clutched every dollar of federal government transfers, such as the Canada Child Tax Benefit. Those transfers allowed me to get the bananas and bread my son needed, since the social assistance rates were so low and impossible to live on. If only those government transfers could be increased, as First Call is asking for today in the report. I struggled along. So how does my story end? What allowed me to swim forward, to escape treading water on welfare and sinking entirely out of sight in poverty? I secured a position in my field with an employer that paid a living wage for Vancouver. Attaining a living wage is the factor that allowed me to move off social assistance. It was possible for me to secure an apartment, feed myself and my son, get a bus pass, and afford the childcare I needed to work. Implementing the First Call recommendations of establishing a living wage and the $10 a day childcare plan, ending the clawback of child support from single mothers on welfare, raising social assistance rates, and increasing government transfers will help lift BC's children out of poverty today. It would have helped mine. Otherwise, single mothers and others will continue to raise nobody's children in food bank lineups throughout the province, and we all pay. Thank you.